She begged for mercy. What human mercenary did shocked her? The wind on Zera 9 was a blade, slicing through the crimson dusk and overshadowed obsidian fields, weaving mournfully through the broken arches of a temple lost to time. Mason crouched behind a toppled statue, his blaster drawn tight against his chest, visor pulsing with data as it pierced the swirling haze. The dying sun bled its last light over the ruins, catching every jagged edge, every shard of glassy stone that jutted up from the earth like bones. He listened, steadying his breath, heart thumping in the tight shell of his armored exosuit. His target was there, outlined in the fading glow. The last of the Veyari, kneeling alone amid the debris. She was a vision, skin a vivid electric blue that shimmered against the gloom, hair a wild, tangled mane of deep crimson, cascading in restless waves over lean, sinewy shoulders. Silvery scars traced looping patterns along her arms, catching the light as she moved, and her eyes, piercing green, sharp as emeralds, missed nothing, scanning the ruins with a wary, haunted intelligence. Mason let his visor linger on her. The Argo cartel had promised him a fortune for proof she lived. A fortune doubled if he brought her back alive. The promise of credits burned in his mind, hot and insistent. He edged forward, boots careful over the cracked temple floor, every servo in his suit whispering for silence. He'd tracked her across half a world, over salt deserts and through firestorms, and now she was right here, almost within reach. But then, a single pebble betrayed him, crunching beneath his heel, the sharp sound cracking the hush. The Veyari spun to face him, back straight, muscles tense to spring. Her gaze was fierce, unyielding, though Mason caught the flicker of fear in her eyes, a shadow behind the pride. Her voice was low, melodic, but edged raw from days, maybe weeks, of running. If you've come to end me, at least let me face you. He kept the blaster steady, its muzzle aimed squarely at her chest. The visor flickered, tagging her vital signs, mapping her stance. He said nothing. Mercy was never in the contract. She rose from the rubble in a single fluid motion, shoulders squared, her chin set with the kind of pride that refused to bow to fate. "You serve the cartel?" she demanded, chin high. "They'll tear me apart for what I know. Is that what you want, human?" "I want my credits," Mason answered, voice flat, snapping a restraint from his belt. The metal ring gleamed coldly in his gauntlet. "Wait!" Her tone shifted, less pleading, more resolute, as if she'd found some last reserve of hope. She took a step closer, palms open. "Your contract is for a living Veyari, but I can offer you something greater, a legacy for your kind." He hesitated, gaze narrowing behind his visor. "Talk." Her eyes never left his, bright with a mixture of desperation and challenge. "Have you heard of the lost colony vessel, the Horizon?" He frowned, keeping the blaster trained on her. "That's a legend, old spacer stories." "It's real," she whispered, voice trembling with the weight of the secret. "I know where it lies. Untouched technology, pure human DNA, enough to change your people's fate. Let me show you." Mason's thoughts raced, the offer burning through his resolve. The bounty was immense, but the Horizon, if it was real, was myth made flesh, a treasure beyond anything the cartel could promise. He stepped forward, letting the restraint dangle from his fingers, eyes on her, as if he could see through to the truth behind her words. But then, the sky above them tore open with the scream of engines. A cartel gunship thundered overhead, its hull bristling with cannons, searchlights slicing through the dusk. Mason's visor flared red with warning. They weren't here for a pickup. They were here to erase all witnesses. "Down!" Mason barked, grabbing Lyra and yanking her behind the toppled statue as the first barrage of plasma fire hammered the ground where she'd just knelt. Stone vaporized in a flash of light, molten shards raining down around them. Betrayal churned in Mason's gut, white-hot and blinding. He moved without hesitation, training and rage sharpening his every action. He sighted the first trooper, a bulky shape in cartel armor, and squeezed the trigger. The shot punched through the visor, dropping the trooper before he could return fire. Two more figures fanned out, weapons ready. Mason lobbed a shrapnel grenade, timing the throw to catch them as they took cover behind a broken pillar. The blast ripped through the air, shattering stone and armor alike. The squad leader, a hulking insectoid in black and gold, charged through the smoke, mandibles clacking. Mason drew his blade, parried a sweeping claw, and drove the knife through the alien's armored throat. Purple ichor spattered the stone as the leader fell. The last two came fast, one firing wild bursts from a sidearm, the other closing in, blades flashing. Mason sidestepped, shooting the gunman through the chest, then caught the last by the wrist, twisting and breaking the grip before finishing him with a ruthless strike. Silence settled over the ruins, broken only by the wind and the faint crackle of ruined circuits. Mason straightened, breathing hard, scanning for more threats. Lyra rose, eyes wide, not with terror, but with something closer to awe. He turned to her, snapping a restraint onto her wrist with practiced speed. "You, your secret, your ship. They're all mine now." He pulled her up, guiding her quickly through the debris toward his vessel, the Peregrine, waiting like a shadow beyond the temple's shattered gates. Mason glanced over his shoulder once at the smoking wreckage, jaw set. "Let's go claim my prize." The Peregrine's cockpit was cramped, thick with the scent of metal and ozone. Bulkheads pressed close, every panel etched with the scars of old battles and desperate escapes. Mason shoved Lyra into the co-pilot's seat, her wrist cuff tethered to a rail just far enough for her to sit, but not to stand. Her eyes, impossibly green, never left his face, tracking every movement as he ran the power-up sequence, fingers flicking over switches with the easy confidence of a man who lived and died by the reliability of his ship. "They'll come after us," she warned, voice low but unwavering. "Let them," Mason replied, the hint of a smirk curling his lips as lights flared to life on the console. "I left a surprise in their nav system. We've got a head start." Lyra watched him, head tilted, lips pressed into a flat line. "You should worry more about me than them," she challenged. He shot her a quick glance, one brow raised. "Should I? You're my ticket out. They're just the price of doing business." The hum of the engines grew deeper, vibrating through the floor. Suddenly, alarms shrieked, harsh and insistent. Red icons blossomed on the viewport as cartel interceptors dropped from orbit, their sleek hulls bristling with weaponry. Mason's hands danced across the controls, slamming the throttle forward. The Peregrine jerked, inertial dampeners whining as the ship leapt from the battered landing pad and soared into the void. On the scanner, enemy ships fanned out, closing fast. Laser fire stitched the darkness, lancing across the shields and sending blue ripples across the cockpit glass. "The debris field," Lyra said suddenly, voice sharp with urgency. She pointed to the nav display, her cuffed arm trembling as she tapped the coordinates for Sector Delta 3. "There's a way through. They can't follow. My people can sense gravitational shifts. Yours can't. Trust me, or we both die." Mason hesitated, the briefest flicker of uncertainty in his eyes as the ship rocked under another barrage. The cartel ships had numbers, and he knew his own ship's limits. He bared his teeth in a grimace and threw the Peregrine into a hard bank, plunging toward the chaos of the debris field. Chunks of shattered starships and drifting plates of hulls spun in a slow, deadly ballet. The light from the planet's fractured sun flashed off jagged metal, turning the field into a maze of knives and shadow. Mason's knuckles whitened on the controls as he threaded the Peregrine into the gap, hull plating groaning in protest. Inside the cockpit, Lyra transformed. Her posture shifted, muscles relaxing as her gaze went distant. She seemed to be listening to something Mason could not hear, head tilted to the side, lips moving silently as she calculated. Then, With sudden certainty, she spoke, her words crisp, each one a command. Starboard, 4 degrees, now. Mason obeyed, trusting her instinct over his own, as a shattered engine core spun past, missing them by a breath. Cut main thrusters by 12%. Pulse the retros, 3 short bursts. He did as she said, hands flying over the controls, the ship shuddering as it slipped between 2 tumbling slabs of blackened armor. A cartel interceptor tried to follow, but misjudged the gravitational eddies. Its wing clipped a floating strut, spinning wildly before erupting in a silent bloom of fire. Keep steady, Lyra murmured, her voice softer now, half trance, half prayer. Left, 3 degrees. Wait, now, full thrust. Mason felt the ship respond, moving as if guided by an unseen hand. They slipped through a narrow gap, metal scraping along the starboard hull with a shriek. The maglock on Lyra's cuff sparked, circuits overloading, and the restraint snapped open. She tumbled forward, momentum slamming her against Mason's side. Her skin was cool against his neck, her crimson hair trailing across his cheek, carrying a scent of alien earth and electric rain. Instinctively, Mason caught her, strong hands wrapping around her shoulders to steady her. For a heartbeat, they were pressed close, her breath hot against his jaw, his pulse thundering in his ears. He felt the tension in her body, the taut muscle beneath the strange, luminous skin. Neither spoke, the moment suspended, charged with something fierce and new. Then Mason remembered himself. He guided her firmly, but not unkindly, back to her seat, eyes lingering a moment too long before he reached for a spare tie-down strap and secured it around her waist. The ship lurched clear of the debris, cartel ships still searching for a path, but unable to match the Peregrine's run. Mason shot a glance at Lyra, saw the flush of adrenaline in her cheeks, the challenge in her eyes. "You ever fly like that before?" he asked, the old edge creeping back into his voice. She met his gaze, lips curving just enough to show she understood the unspoken compliment. "Not with someone who follows orders." He grunted, a reluctant smile tugging at his mouth, and brought the ship around toward Freeport Vega, the only outpost this far from civilized space where a man could disappear if he paid the right bribes. The approach to Vega was chaos, the docking rings crowded with battered freighters, scavenger rigs, and pirate cutters. Neon signs flickered between hydroponic towers, and the comm channels buzzed with threats, deals, and desperate pleas. Mason found an empty berth near the edge, guiding the Peregrine in on manual while Lyra watched, silent and wary. Once docked, he unbuckled, rising to his full height and looming over her. "Stay put. Don't touch anything," he ordered, voice hard. The broken tether on her wrist was gone, but something else, less visible, had replaced it, a tension that neither restraint nor threat could sever. He strode out, locking the hatch behind him, boots ringing on the metal deck as he vanished into the warren of the station. The ship was silent, save for the hum of life support and the distant shouts from the dock outside. Lyra sat unmoving for a long moment, then slowly rose, exploring the boundaries of her newfound freedom. She ran her fingers over the battered controls, pausing at the flickering screens, eyes narrowing at the coded locks and encrypted files Mason kept there. When Mason returned, his arms full of supplies and his face shadowed by a new bruise, he found her pacing. The tension in the cabin had sharpened, the air crackling with accusation. Lyra's eyes blazed as she rounded on him. "Your files are disgusting," she spat, voice shaking with anger and something deeper. Betrayal, perhaps. "You treat us like property." Mason met her fury with cold indifference, stripping off his armor piece by piece. Each plate hit the floor with a dull clang, revealing sweat-soaked underclothes and the hard lines of a life lived on the edge. "I treat everything like property," he shot back, tossing a fresh shirt and a pair of worn pants her way. "It's survival." She caught the bundle, spinning away from him as she stripped off her tattered robe. Her back was to him, the curve of her shoulders traced by scars, her long tail flicking in irritation. Mason's gaze lingered, drawn to the way she moved, defiant, proud, utterly alien and yet achingly familiar. Something fierce and unfamiliar stirred in him, a need he'd long ago buried beneath layers of armor and cynicism. Lyra changed quickly, tugging the rough fabric over her lithe frame, her tail slipping through a slit she cut herself. Mason tried to look away but failed, caught by the stubborn grace of her every movement. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence between them alive with possibility, a spark ready to ignite. The Nebula Lounge was a den of shadows and danger, its low ceiling choked by curling trails of exotic smoke and neon signs flickering in languages Mason barely recognized. The air throbbed with the low pulse of alien jazz, and the crowd pressed in, pirates, smugglers, and worse, all drawn to the forbidden light of Freeport Vega's most notorious haunt. Mason guided Lyra through the shifting bodies, his hand firm at the small of her back. The crowd parted, curiosity and avarice sharpening the gazes that followed them. She was a rare thing here, too rare to go unnoticed. They slipped into a secluded booth, its scarred metal table ringed by cracked synth leather. Mason positioned himself to face the room, never relaxing, eyes darting between the bar and the battered door. Lyra slid in across from him, every muscle taut, green eyes glittering beneath her tangled crimson hair. Her blue skin shimmered in the half-light, drawing stares and whispered speculation from the nearest tables. A towering Grath lumbered out of the haze, 6 eyes gleaming beneath a bony ridge. Its chitinous arms were thick as tree trunks, and the stink of industrial oil clung to its mottled hide. The Grath's attention fixed on Lyra, a predatory grin bearing rows of needle teeth. "What's this, human?" the Grath rumbled, voice echoing over the music. "You bringing rare goods to market?" "She's with me," Mason said, voice cold as space and twice as empty. The Grath sneered, tilting its head as if considering the challenge. "Maybe I'll take her off your hands." Before the last word left the Grath's mouth, Mason exploded into motion. He slammed the edge of the table into the Grath's knees, toppling the giant back with a crash. The Grath roared, claws lashing out, but Mason was already moving. He drove a fist into the creature's jaw, then pivoted, twisting the Grath's arm until chitin cracked. The bar fell silent, every patron watching as Mason finished the fight with a brutal efficiency that brooked no argument. The Grath slumped, groaning, and Mason stepped back, chest heaving. He shot a glare at the watching crowd, daring anyone to interfere, then grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her from the booth. She stumbled after him, breath shallow, her pulse thundering in the fragile bones of her wrist. Together they wove through the silent bar and up the narrow stairs, every eye tracking their ascent. Mason hustled her down a shadowed corridor, past flickering panels and battered doors, until they reached the quarters he'd rented for the night. The lock snicked shut behind them, and he spun, pinning her to the wall with one arm braced beside her head. The room was small, the air stale, but suddenly every molecule seemed electrified. "I told you not to stand out," he growled, his face inches from hers. "I did nothing," she shot back, her breath coming quick. Her eyes flashed with anger and something hotter. "You exist," he snarled, jaw tight, but his hand tangled in her wild hair, thumb brushing the delicate edge of her ear. His grip was rough, but his touch lingered, heat sparking at every contact point. "You have no idea what they do to you, or what I want to do." Desire, sharp and dangerous, filled the air, an ache that bordered on pain. Lyra didn't flinch, her lips parted, chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. Mason leaned in, his lips crashing into hers, hungry and rough, tasting defiance and desperation in equal measure. She met him with equal fire, hands gripping his arms, nails biting through the thin fabric. Their bodies collided, heat and need overwhelming caution, dissolving the boundaries between captor and captive. The world outside the quarters vanished. There was only this room, only this moment, only the two of them, locked together in a collision of longing and fear. Mason's hands explored the curve of her back, mapping every scar, every secret, while Lyra responded with a wildness that was all her own. She surrendered, but not in weakness, in defiance of the fear that had hunted her across worlds. In Mason's arms, she found a different kind of danger, and she embraced it with a hunger that left them both breathless. Night melted into day, and then into another night. They barely spoke, their words replaced by touch and whispered promises neither of them entirely understood. In the darkness, they forgot for a time the war outside, the cartel's pursuit, the fate of lost civilizations. Days later, the Peregrine tore through the dark toward the nebula's rim, the storm of colors swirling beyond the viewport. The cockpit was charged with new tension, every look, every brush of skin alive with a current that refused to die. They were no longer adversaries, nor strangers bound by necessity, but something more complicated, more dangerous. Mason piloted in silence, his mind a chaos of calculations and memory. Lyra sat beside him, hands resting lightly on her lap, eyes focused far beyond the stars. At her feet, a battered satchel contained the only clues to the horizon's last resting place. She had finally revealed the coordinates, tracing them on his skin in the dark, trusting him with secrets that could doom them both. As they neared the nebula, swirling mists of violet and gold obscured the sensors, blanketing the ship in static. Lyra's voice was soft but sure. Shields to minimum, engines at half. Let me guide you, Mason. You have to trust me. He hesitated, hands hovering over the controls. Trust was a foreign word, an indulgence he'd never afforded anyone. But now, something in her tone made him yield. Tell me what you see, he said, his voice gentler than he meant it to be. Lyra closed her eyes, her breathing slowing until it matched the pulse of the nebula outside. To port, 20 degrees. There's a break in the plasma. Now, down, 3 degrees. Hold steady. He followed her directions, the Peregrine drifting through shifting clouds of color. For an hour they navigated blind, Lyra guiding Mason with whispered instructions, each movement precise. Turbulence buffeted the hull, lightning arced along the shields, but together they slipped through the chaos, moving as one. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the mists parted. Before them hung the horizon, a colossal sphere of ancient metal and crystal, suspended in the void, its surface inscribed with glyphs that shimmered with starlight. The ship dwarfed anything Mason had ever seen, its hull a patchwork of golden alloys and luminous panels, radiating an eerie, gentle light. Mason stared, awestruck. His hands fell from the controls, breath stolen by the sheer impossibility of it. That's the horizon? It's more than a ship, Lyra said, her voice reverent, green eyes shining with reflected light. It's a seed for new worlds. My ancestors built it for yours, to give hope. He turned to her, searching her face for the deception he was sure he'd find. But there was only truth, raw and vulnerable in her gaze. The cartel wants it for power, she continued, her voice trembling with emotion. But it can't be awakened by force. It requires both a Vayari and a human, two keys bound together. Only then can it open. Realization struck Mason with the force of a meteor. He was no longer a captor, nor she a prize. They were partners now, bound by fate and by the ship that waited in the silent dark. The future, his, hers, perhaps all of humanity's, hung between them, suspended on the edge of possibility. He reached for her hand, fingers intertwining with hers, and felt the last of the old barriers fall away. Together, they faced the horizon and whatever destiny waited within its ancient silent hull. Docking with the horizon was humbling. The Peregrine, battered and lean, was nothing but a speck against the colossal sphere, a firefly approaching the moon. Its hull shimmered with alien light, each panel humming with an ancient energy that dwarfed every vessel Mason had ever seen. The docking clamps hissed as they locked, and the airlock cycled open with a sound like a sigh. Mason and Lyra stepped into the hangar, boots ringing on seamless metal. Inside, the air was thin and cold, every breath edged with the taste of memory and dust. Light filtered down from unseen sources, pale and blue, casting long shadows down the empty corridors that stretched out in all directions. The silence was complete, no hum of engines, no whir of drones. Only the echo of their footsteps disturbed the vast hush. Mason glanced at Lyra, keeping his blaster close. "Where now?" His voice sounded small in the emptiness. "To the core, the awakening chamber," Lyra replied, her voice softer, almost reverent. She ran her fingers along the glowing glyphs in the wall, and doors opened before her with a whisper. They walked, step after step, down corridors that curved in gentle spirals, past ancient murals and tangled root-like conduits pulsing with faint light. The architecture was alive with subtle motion, the walls shifting as if the ship itself breathed. Mason found his sense of time slipping away, the journey seeming both endless and outside of time. "How old is this place?" he murmured. Lyra smiled, her face aglow with the light of remembered history. "Older than your oldest cities. My ancestors dreamt of unity, Veyari and human together. This ship is their last hope." They reached a round chamber, vast and cathedral-like, at the heart of the ship. A single column of pure light descended from above, bathing the floor in shifting radiance. At its center stood two pods, neither metal nor glass, but organic, intricate, their surfaces pulsing with subtle color and texture. "The fusion cradles," Lyra explained, awe in her voice. "They'll link us to the horizon. We must trust each other, Mason. There is no other way." Mason stared at the pods, uncertainty warring with something deeper, something raw and urgent. He looked at Lyra, saw her faith, her hope, the shadows in her eyes. Against all odds, he nodded. "Trust," he said, tasting the word like a promise. They stepped into the pods, facing each other. The lids lowered, soft and warm, sealing them in. Darkness pressed in, then a wave of warmth and the sensation of falling, dissolving, opening. Mason's mind expanded, consciousness merging with something vast and unfamiliar. Suddenly, he felt Lyra. Not just her presence, but the core of her sorrow for her lost people, her relentless hope for the future, her awe at his stubbornness and strength. Her thoughts brushed his, gentle but searching, and he saw himself through her eyes, a man battered by loss, driven by the lonely code of his own battered honor, desperate for connection even as he pushed it away. Lyra felt his defenses fall, sensed his pain, his yearning, the fierce tenderness buried beneath his armor. The intimacy was overwhelming, every memory naked, every emotion laid bare. Fear, admiration, anger, longing, each tangled with the other in a tapestry of need and hope. Their souls, exposed, forged a bond deeper than flesh. The horizon felt it too. The chamber thrummed, light growing brighter. Deep beneath their feet, the heart of the ship pulsed, a rhythm not heard for millennia. The ancient vessel awakened, answering the call of their unity. Then suddenly, the peace shattered. Alarms blared, sharp and alien, vibrating through the metal. The pod lids snapped open. Mason and Lyra tumbled free, minds still linked by a thin thread of connection that vibrated with shared thought. A mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. "Unauthorized breach detected. Hostiles on deck 5. Mason swore, grabbing his blaster. Lyra pressed her palm to a glowing console, feeling the horizon's distress through their bond. "The cartel," Mason said, face grim. "They found us." A flicker of images, memories not his own, flashed through Mason's mind. He saw Dax, his old rival, scarred and ruthless, leading a squad of armored mercenaries through the ship's corridors. Their weapons glinted with the promise of violence. "The ship's defenses are weak," Lyra said, worry tightening her voice. "It's barely awake." Mason grinned, wolfish. "Doesn't matter. This is our ship now." They moved together, Mason leading with practiced stealth, Lyra guiding him down secret passages only she could sense. The horizon responded to her touch, doors sliding open, air shifting to obscure their scent. On the security monitors, cartel troops fanned out, hunting. Mason crouched behind a bulkhead, watching two mercenaries sweep the corridor. Lyra's whisper sounded in his mind as much as his ear. "Gas line. Overhead vent." He nodded, shot the valve, and a cloud of blue mist spilled down, choking the invaders. Mason struck from the shadows, his movements efficient, precise, a ghost wreathed in fury. They ducked into a maintenance shaft, Lyra's hands glowing as she brushed the walls. Circuits sparked, lighting panels flickered, and bulkheads sealed behind them, trapping cartel troops in dead ends. Mason's tactics and Lyra's connection turned the horizon into a living maze, each step a new trap. She vented gravity in one corridor, sending two mercenaries tumbling helplessly into the ceiling. Mason picked them off as they floated, cold and unflinching. Lyra rerouted power, plunging entire decks into darkness. Mason stalked the shadows, striking with ruthless economy, never wasting a shot. They moved as one, her guidance, his violence, each saving the other in the chaos. Mason covered her as she hacked an access panel, Lyra warning him of threats before he saw them. Their thoughts tangled, fear and adrenaline twining with the electric current of their bond. At last, the first wave was down. The alarms faded, leaving only the echo of breath and the distant thrum of the awakened ship. Mason leaned against the wall, sweat trickling down his spine. Lyra approached, her steps light despite the weight of the moment. In the hush, she reached for him, her hand trembling as she traced his jaw. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "You are extraordinary, Mason." He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips, brushing a kiss against her knuckles. A strand of her crimson hair slipped free, and he tucked it behind her ear, fingers lingering. The bond between them flared, stronger for the danger, for the trust born in fire and darkness. In the heart of the horizon, hunted and alone, they had only each other. But together, they were more than enough. The path to the core was a gauntlet, traps older than memory, and cartel mercenaries determined to claim the horizon's secrets. Mason and Lyra moved as a single, living weapon. He the blade, ruthless and fast, she the shield, her mental link shimmering between them, warning him of every hidden threat before it struck. Sometimes she would cry out, "Duck!" a split second before a plasma bolt scorched overhead, or pull him aside just as the floor caved in beneath a weighted plate. He trusted her warnings as much as his own instincts, and together they left a trail of broken sensors and silent bodies behind. A trio of cartel troops rounded a corner, guns blazing. Mason threw himself forward, rolling beneath the spray, returning fire with cold precision. Lyra's hands danced over the wall, triggering a security glyph. Ancient defense drones swarmed, sparking and sizzling as they intercepted the enemy. Mason grabbed her wrist, and they ran, boots echoing along crystalline floors, their breath ragged, but their steps in perfect harmony. They found shelter in a preserved garden, a relic of the ship's creators. The air was warmer, thick with the scent of alien blossoms, starlight filtering through latticed crystal overhead. Moss and ivy crept up marble pillars, and bioluminescent insects hovered above a pool of water so still it mirrored the stars beyond. Mason slumped against a stone, one hand pressed to a spreading stain at his ribs. His breathing was rough, pain etched deep in the lines of his jaw. Lyra knelt beside him, pulling a packet from her satchel. Her blue fingers were deft, gentle, as she cleaned the wound, her touch cool and steady. "You fought well," Mason murmured, eyes half closed. "You saved my life more than once back there." Lyra shook her head, a faint smile curving her lips. We saved each other. We are partners now. She pressed a sealant over his wound, her touch lingering just a moment longer. He reached for her hand, and she did not pull away. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of things unsaid, the pulse of the ship, the memory of battles won side by side. Mason leaned in, hesitating for the first time, not with doubt, but with reverence. The kiss they shared was slow, unhurried, born not of desperation, but of respect and a bond forged in fire. Lyra's hands cupped his face, thumbs tracing the battered lines of his cheeks. His fingers followed the silvery scars along her jaw, learning her by heart. He lifted her, his movements careful, and carried her to a bed of moss near the shimmering pool. The ancient garden surrounded them, starlight painting their skin in violet and silver. They lay together, not as fugitives, but as equals. Every touch a vow, every breath a promise whispered into the hush of the horizon's sanctuary. This was no desperate act, but a choice, a silent pledge to each other, a fusion of souls at the edge of the galaxy. In the ancient garden, they created something new, a vow neither words nor time could erase. When at last they rose, their hands remained entwined. Together they pressed onward, deeper into the heart of the horizon. The corridors narrowed, the air thickening with energy and anticipation. At the end, they found the core, a cathedral of spinning rings, great gyroscopes moving in perfect synchronicity around a sphere of pure, living light. The heart of the ship pulsed, casting rainbow shadows across their faces. "This is it," Lyra whispered, awe and fear trembling in her voice. "Once I begin, I'll be vulnerable, connected to the ship. I won't be able to defend myself." Mason stood tall, battered but unyielding. "You won't have to fight alone," he promised, the words a vow as sacred as any he had ever spoken. Before Lyra could reply, the doors exploded inward, shards of alloy ringing like a death knell. Dax strode in, scarred and swaggering, flanked by a squad of cartel elites in black armor, their weapons ready. His eyes found Mason, a predatory smile twisting his lips. "Hand over the girl, Mason," Dax called, voice echoing through the chamber. "Maybe I'll let you live." Mason stepped forward, blaster raised, shielding Lyra with his body. "She stays with me. The horizon is ours." Dax grinned wider, drawing his monoblade. "I hoped you'd resist." The cartel troops surged forward. Mason fired, cutting down the first two with precision. Lyra darted to the central console, hands flying over the alien controls as she summoned the ship's power. A column of light enveloped her, her form suspended, eyes blazing with stars. She was gone to him, mind lost in communion with the horizon, and he felt the bond flare, her fear, her focus, her wild determination. Mason fought with desperate skill, using the spinning rings as cover. Laser fire filled the air, searing past him. He ducked, rolled, fired from the hip. Each shot counted. A bolt clipped his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. He gritted his teeth, pushed through the pain, and kept moving. Another struck his leg, blood running hot down his boot, but he pressed on. Lyra's consciousness stretched, spreading through the ship. Through their link, Mason felt her panic spike as a mercenary closed in. He turned, caught the attacker with a shot to the chest, and staggered behind a pillar. Lyra's voice was in his head. "You're not alone. I'm here." He drew breath, found his feet. At the controls, Lyra unleashed the horizon's pulse. A wave of energy swept the chamber, blue-white and blinding. Cartel soldiers screamed, their armor shorting out, bodies tumbling across the floor. Only Dax, shielded by a generator at his belt, and Mason remained standing. Dax stalked forward, monoblade gleaming. "Just you and me now, Mason. Old times, huh?" Mason spat blood, forcing himself upright. "You always were a parasite, Dax." Dax lunged, blade singing. They met in the center of the core, the fight brutal and close. Steel rang on steel, sparks flying as they circled the glowing sphere. Dax's blade slipped past Mason's guard, biting deep into his side. Mason cried out, vision swimming, but he used the pain, let Dax close, let the blade drive in just enough, then twisted, driving his own knife beneath Dax's armor. Dax's eyes widened in disbelief, strength bleeding out of him. He staggered, tried to speak, then collapsed in a heap, the monoblade skittering across the floor. Mason, barely standing, looked up at Lyra, still bathed in the column of light, her body suspended as she guided the birth of a world. The core pulsed, energy rising, washing over them both. Mason dropped to one knee, blood pooling around him, but his eyes never left her. The horizon was theirs. The bridge of the horizon was silent, bathed in a golden glow that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of something vast and new. Through the grand viewport, a world that had once been barren and lifeless now spun below, a blue and green miracle painted with swirling clouds and sunlit continents. The transformation was impossible and absolute. Verdant forests stretched from pole to pole, rivers wound silver threads through emerald fields, and sapphire seas gleamed beneath a newborn sky. It was the work of the horizon, ancient and eternal, awakened at last. Mason stood at the center of the bridge, battered but whole, his wounds little more than old memories. His armor was gone, left behind with the man he used to be. He wore simple clothes, the fabric unfamiliar but comfortable, woven from the horizon's stores. The ship had healed him, body and spirit, sealing wounds that had festered for years. There was strength in his stance, but a softness too, a gentling born of trust given and received. He watched as Lyra entered, her bare feet silent on the luminous deck. She moved with a dancer's grace, her blue skin aglow with reflected starlight. The scars along her arms faded now to mere whispers of silver. The horizon had worked its magic on her as well, mending flesh and soul, weaving the subtle thread of its power through them both. She paused beside him, so close he could feel the warmth of her presence, her gaze drawn to the sight beyond the glass. "It's beautiful," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with awe and joy. Her green eyes shone as she took in the world below, drinking in every detail, the wild coastline, the lush valleys, the promise of life where once there had been only dust. A single tear traced down her cheek, glimmering as it caught the golden light. "Our ancestors dreamed of this," she said, her words reverent. "A partnership. Creation. This is what the horizon was meant for, not war, not conquest, but renewal." Mason reached out, brushing the tear away with a calloused thumb. His touch was gentle, his eyes filled with something new, something unguarded. The mercenary who had hunted her, who had once seen everything as a commodity to be traded, was gone. In his place stood a man changed by love, by sacrifice, by the fierce, unexpected hope that had grown between them. "We're its guardians now," Mason said softly. He looked into her eyes, seeing not the alien, but the partner, the equal, the woman who had shown him a better way. And each other's. Lyra leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, her tail curling around his leg, a gesture of trust, of belonging, that needed no words. The warmth of her body seeped into him, grounding him in this moment, this truth. They had fought as fugitives, but now, here at the end of the journey, they were something more. "We're not fugitives anymore, Mason," she murmured, a smile breaking through her tears. He drew her closer, his arm slipping around her waist, the gesture protective and possessive all at once. "No," he agreed, his voice quiet but certain. "We're home." For a while, they simply stood together, letting the silence settle around them, broken only by the distant hum of the horizon's heart. They watched as dawn crept across the new world, painting the land in gold and rose, awakening possibilities neither of them could have dreamed. Mason turned, studying Lyra's face, the curve of her jaw, the wild tangle of crimson hair, the depth of her eyes that seemed to hold both sorrow and hope. He traced a line along her cheek, lingering on the delicate edge of her ear. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Trusting me, all of this." She smiled, a flash of mischief lighting her eyes. "Not for a heartbeat," she said. "You gave me more than I thought possible. Freedom, a future. You saw me, Mason. You chose me." He swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. "I tried to sell your secrets," he confessed, voice rough. "But you gave me a universe." She laughed softly, her hand finding his, fingers twining together. "Then we're even." They gazed out together, the bridge aglow, the world below a tapestry of promise. Mason felt the bond between them, invisible but unbreakable, a gift from the horizon, a thread that tied their souls together, human and Vayari, the last of their lines and the first of something new. Not captor and captive, not hunter and hunted, but partners, creators, lovers, survivors who had become something more. Below them, the world waited, a sanctuary born from violence and hope, from a mercenary's unexpected compassion and an exile's desperate faith. They had risked everything to reach this place, and now the reward was beyond imagining. A second chance, a fresh beginning, a place to belong. Mason turned to Lyra, his eyes searching hers. "We could build anything here," he said, wonder in his voice. "A life, a people, a future." She nodded, her lips parting in a smile radiant with possibility. "We will, together." He bent to kiss her, slow and deep, a promise woven into every touch, the promise of countless dawns on the world they had made together. And as the horizon sailed on, cradle of a new civilization, their shadows merged, entwined forever in the golden light. That's the end of the story. You can leave us a tip or become a channel member. This greatly helps our team improve the quality of our videos. You can send a tip using the Super Thanks button right below the video. We truly appreciate each and every one of you who has subscribed and supported us. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and write in the comments what you liked most about this story. Our team will be very grateful to you. You can find even more fascinating stories on our channel. See you in the next video.